don't know about you, but I remember sitting in a retreat with some other pastors, and we were talking about, hey, what are we going to teach on in January? Kick off the brand new year. And one of them was like, genius idea, guys. Let's do Revelation. Right. And we all were like, let's do Revelation. So hear me on this. For some of us, we may hear this idea that we're going to be digging into Revelation, and we may be thinking to ourselves, I'm just going to be flat out honest, of like, this is going to be straight up hellfire and brimstone. I might burst your bubble. We're going to be diving into Revelation. It's going to be, I'm excited about this. We're going to be diving into the 7 letters. We're going to be diving into what Jesus spoke to the churches. And as I got excited about this, I couldn't help but remember back to New Year's Eve for me when it was 1999, about to change to the year 2000. I'm looking out. I think most of us in this congregation remember that. There might be like 2 of us or 3 of us who maybe can't really remember much of it. I'm looking at you young college students. Oh, to be young again. But I remember it, right? Like 1999, and maybe you were like me, like, can you remember kind of the buzz around that? Because people were going nuts, y'all. It was awesome. You go to Meijer, and you thought like the world was literally ending right before our eyes. There was like no canned goods. There was no bottled water. People are like buying and making makeshift bunkers underground. There was this buzz of literally what was going to happen when our year goes from 1999 to 2000. We were all convinced that technology was going to like blow up. Like it wasn't going to work. Our computers would not know how to function from going from 1999 to 2000. We were convinced that like phones wouldn't work, computers wouldn't work, everything in our world was just going to shut down. And maybe for some of us, we even felt like all of a sudden we're just going to melt into a puddle of mush. I remember it like yesterday. I remember these conversations. There was this sense of uncertainty and worry. And for many, if we're just going to be honest, for many, there's a deep sense of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the uncertainty, fear of the new world, fear of tomorrow. Fear. They went to bed after the clock struck midnight, and it felt like nothing really happened. And they went to bed with maybe a fear in their hearts, thinking to themselves, when I wake up, is everything going to be different? Because we had no idea. And I often wonder as we headed into this year, just a few short days ago, I often wonder if that's a similar position that we maybe in our world, in our nation, and maybe even ourselves have felt ourselves in. Fearful. Fearful. There may be some of us who went to bed New Year's Eve feeling terrified of what 2021 was going to bring. We looked at 2020 and we were like, I'm glad that's done, but I have no idea what that's going to bring. There may be also some of us over in this camp that went to bed on 2020 and woke up in 2021 and was like, woo, 2020 is done. I made it. I can do one of these little things. You know what I'm saying? Like, we are here. It's going to be great. Life is new. Like, everything is great. But hear me on it. We are 3 days in. I had to make sure we are 3 days in. I don't even know. We're 3 days in, and we still have no idea. And I'm okay with that. And you're going to understand maybe why, and I hope that we're going to be able to understand that together and walk in that together. But, like, I'm okay with that we have no idea. Because there is a reality that 2020 and 2021, we have no idea what it's going to look like in 2021. 2021 might be looking at the year 2020 and saying like, hey, you thought that was fun and that was great? Hold my hot cocoa and watch this. I'm just saying that could be a very real reality, y'all. but we don't know. And as we journey in this, I believe that God wants something more for us. I believe that God has something more in store for us. And as we journey into Revelation, I believe that God's going to reveal that. But so often as this book, the book of Revelation, if we're just going to be honest, when a lot of times you hear somebody, especially a pastor or a church teaching on the book of Revelation, we automatically go to one train of thought. Am I right? But what if, and hear me on this, what if the pages in the book of Revelation have something more than just the end in mind? What if the book of Revelation has something more than just the end? But what if they have the cold, hard truth of the greatest blessing, healing, and restoration to be told? What if there's more? See, the purpose of this book, and I want to be very clear with this, is the purpose of this book is to teach us how to live as a disciple. The purpose of the book is to live as a disciple of Jesus in contrast to the world we find ourselves living in right here and right now. How do we be a disciple and live as a disciple of Jesus in contrast to everything else that's happening in the world right now? It shows us how to live victoriously now because we know how the story ends. I can live in victory now because I know how the story will end. It's right here. So I can be victorious now. I can be victorious today. And the author is John. And you're going to discover that John wrote this book through this unique encounter with Jesus himself. And I love it. I love it because John writes this book and he starts out and he's urging the churches, he's urging the bride of Christ to remember who she is. And he's urging them to remember Christ and keep the focus on him. Maybe I need to say that part a little bit more often. Church, we need to keep our focus on Jesus. No matter what's happening around our world, if we stay focused on Jesus, we live victoriously. Y'all get what I'm saying in that? Y'all, it's 2021. We're going to get some action up in here. We're going to have some amens, some hallelujahs, some waving on the white hankies, whatever it might be. We can live victoriously today, knowing that it ends with him being victorious. And here's what John writes in verse 3. This, you're not going to see it on your screen, so just listen to me reading it here. God blesses the one who reads the words of this prophecy to the church, and he blesses all who listen to his message and obey what it says, for the time is near. So here John says, God will bless those who listen and obey. It's pretty straightforward. Blessings come when we listen and apply what is being said here. And he's urging the churches to listen, to lead, and to lean into what Christ is about to say. To listen, to lead, and to lean in. There's a sense of urgency that John writes this book, these letters with. There's a sense of urgency. And here's why. Because when we live our lives, when we are living life with Christ, it means that we are living with a courageous and bold urgency here and now. When we live our lives with Christ, when Christ is living among and with us, we are living with a bold and courageous urgency here and now. This is a good spot to start 2021 with. To live a life with a bold and courageous urgency here and now. How are we doing with that? Gut check time, right off the bat. How are we doing with living a life that is full of bold and courageous urgency, all for the kingdom of God? Because here's the reality. John goes on to talk about what he sees and encounters in this book. Chapter 1, we're going to just kind of go through some of these verses here. First, we're going to go 9 through 11. This is what it says. I, John, am your brother and partner in suffering and in God's kingdom and in the patient endurance. Woo! Patient endurance. Y'all, maybe I'm the only one who has struggled with patient endurance sometimes, right? patient endurance to which Jesus calls us. I was exiled to the island of Patmos for preaching the word of God and for my testimony about Jesus. It was the Lord's day, and I was worshiping in the Spirit. Suddenly, I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet blast, and it said, "Write in a book everything you see and send it to the 7 churches in the cities of Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea." So here he is. Let's get this right? Here he is, and he says, I am worshiping in the Spirit on the Lord's day. So it's this unique experience that he has with Jesus Christ himself. And then, as he's blown away by what he's just encountering, we're going to get to see what he's encountering. This voice, Jesus, says to him, write in a book everything. Now, I want to just be very honest with you. If I have this moment where I'm worshiping and I see like Jesus before me, the first thing in my mind is not going to be, man, where is my pen and paper? You know what I'm saying? My first instinct is like, that's Jesus. And I think that's the same thing with John here, because look what Jesus flat out says, like, make sure you're writing this down. People need to hear this. Do you have your pen ready? Are we good? Write everything down. And here's why. There's this urgency to it, because there are lives, there are souls and people at stake here. With what's about to happen and be seen and be told, there's lives at stake here. There are souls for eternity's sake at stake here. And when we live with Christ, we have to live with the bold and courageous urgency each and every day. You see, oftentimes when you read this book of Revelation, there's 2 temptations, I believe. There's 2 temptations. Temptation number 1 is we get so focusing on the future that we forget about the here and the now, the present. We get so focused about what's going to happen, what could happen, what should happen, that we forget about the here and now that God has called us and appointed us to each and every day to wake up and to do his work for the kingdom. Like he gave you today on purpose for a purpose. You are here today on purpose for a purpose. You're listening maybe to this message on your couch on purpose for a purpose for today. So what are you going to do with the day he's given you? But the temptation number 2 is the complete opposite. We neglect to look ahead at what God is doing and could be doing and should be doing and has told us he's going to be doing. And we focus so much that we here and now that we don't look ahead at the victory to be had. Those are the 2 temptations. We either look too far ahead that we forget about right here, right now, or we are so focused about right here, right now that we never see where God is leading us. But the kicker is this. We know how this all ends. It's very clear. We know that the resurrected Jesus is king and he reigns on high. We know that Jesus is the great unseen reality of the present, so that we don't have to live in fear. He's got this all under control. Fear no longer dictates and controls us. And hear me on this. When John wrote this book, he didn't write it as this coded, hidden, like you have to have certain passcodes and stuff to understand it. John didn't write this as a coded, hidden, unknown message about this uncertain, unattainable future with hopes that a televangelist thousands of years later would use it to, make a propaganda or to turn a profit. He wrote it to real people living in real history with real questions about their circumstances. This book was written to people who were living and breathing real issues. He writes it to encourage and challenge the Christians who are living under a brutal Roman Empire. Brutal Roman Empire. And he writes it to encourage them. And he uses common theological language. There's over 250 Old Testament Hebrew scriptural references in this book. They can identify with it. They can understand it. It's common language for them. He writes it to them so that they can understand that there is hope. And they can know that there's hope. But here's the reality, is that with every strange apocalyptic image, with every strange, even colorful Old Testament reference and prophecy and imagery, he does one thing, and he does one thing very clearly. He points everything back to Jesus. To Jesus, the Son of Man, the Son of God. Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah. He's the Lamb that was slain, and he's the Lamb that will vanquish the beast. He points it all back to Jesus. And I want to make it very clear. If we read this book, if we go through this book, if we read all of this, and if we catch everything else, if we hold on to everything else, but we miss Jesus in this book, we miss the purpose of the book of Revelation. If we catch everything else, and if we hold on to everything else, but we miss Jesus, we miss Revelation. Plain and simple. This book, it tells us about the future. And there's some crazy stuff that happens in this book. But if we miss Jesus, we miss the book. Living with Jesus means living with a courageous urgency in your life. And that's how we can have comfort in the world even when everything else has fallen apart. Because we are pointed directly back to Jesus. And look at what happens as he continues on, verses 12 through 16. When I turned to see who was speaking to me, okay, pause. Try to put yourself, as we read this, in John's shoes real quick, okay? Try to imagine what he's speaking of. When you read these words, imagine the imagery here, okay? Imagine what he's seeing, that he sees 7 gold lampstands. And standing in the middle of the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man. Divine terminology, Son of Man, God. He was wearing a long robe with a gold sash across his chest. His head, his hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were like flames of fire. His feet were like polished bronze refined in a furnace. And his voice thundered like the mighty ocean waves. And he held 7 stars in his right hand, and a sharp 2-edged sword came from his mouth. His face was like the sun in all of its brilliance. Imagine what was just seen. This is the definition, the appearance of Jesus Christ standing before John in the heavens in all the glory. And here John gets this image of Jesus, and he starts to write it down. I don't even know if I would know how to spell half of those words looking at Jesus. I would be so awestruck of who he is and what he has done and what I am seeing that I would literally be like, Jesus, I need you to help me spell right now because I can't even focus. He speaks about his head and his hair. And what's interesting here is there's some terminology stuff where like theologians and scholars, as they read this, they say that when John describes his head and his hair as being white, it represents wisdom. Eyes like flames that can pierce through everything and anything. His feet are bronze. There's a firmness and a security about where he's standing. A thundering voice, powerful, bold. And his right hand holding stars. And it says 7. 7 in the Hebrew was the complete number. So he's holding the complete number of churches, the completeness in his hand. A 2-edged sword from his mouth. This is the same mouth that can cast judgment, but also can speak of grace. His face is like a brilliant, glowing sun. Eugene Peterson is the translator of the Message Bible. And I don't know if you've ever read this, the Message Bible. It's a more of a modern translation. I love it. And this is what he says. I believe we have a chart. If you want to throw that chart up real quick. Perfect. This is what he says. He says, if we observe this, that there are 7 impressions, essentially. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can see that. And the first impression that we get here is forgiveness. But the last one is a blessing. The number 2 and 6 are organs of relationship, the eyes and the mouth. 3 and 5 are parts of the body that express capability, feet and a right hand. And they are all pointing directly to one thing, the voice. It's what Jesus says that finally makes the difference. And I love that after this imagery, after this painted picture of Jesus standing before John, he continues on, and this is what he says, verses 17 through 20. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as if I were dead. Good response, John. But he laid his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. I am the first and I am the last. I am the living one. I died, but look, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and the grave. Write down what you have seen. A gentle reminder, right? Make sure you're writing this down, John. Both the things that are now happening and the things that will happen. This is the meaning of the mystery of the 7 stars you saw on my right hand and the 7 gold lampstands. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. The 7 lampstands are the 7 churches themselves. I love what happens. After John sees Jesus, the first thing that John does is what? He falls as if he were dead. He's literally fallen face first at the feet of Jesus. And then Jesus walks over, puts his hand upon John, and says, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Stop being afraid. You might not understand everything that's happened around you right now, but it's okay. I've got this. Stop being afraid. The chaos that you've endured and everything, and you feel like you can't even do anything, stop being afraid. I've got this. John is standing in the presence of God, Jesus, as he falls face first at the feet of Jesus. Jesus tells him, stop being afraid. And he goes on to say, he literally, and I love this. He literally walked into the treacherous teeth of the greatest enemy there is. He walked into the face of the enemy. And on the cross, he took all the evil that could heap on him, and he bore it all. And then he took the weight of all the sin, took the full force of it, and he let death hold him captive. But here's the kicker. Jesus started to count to 3. And on 3, he burst forth through the grave, and he did what only he could do. He took the keys to death itself. Don't miss that verse there. Don't miss the verse where it says he took the keys to death itself in the grave. He alone is able to bring hope and comfort and peace in an uncertain, chaotic, and broken world. He owns and holds the keys to death or Hades. Jesus owns the keys to death. Do we understand what that means? It means that God controls everything. He alone holds the keys. It means that Jesus stole the weapon of fear, the thing that everybody fears the most, death itself. Jesus holds the keys. And now there is no dominion. Fear itself has no dominion over those who believe that Jesus is Lord. if we get to the bottom of it, all fear is firmly rooted in the fear of death. Fear of criticism, fear of rejection, fear of financial loss, fear of pain. They're all at the rock bottom. It's a fear of death. But here Jesus is standing in the midst of it all, and he says, stop being afraid. I was dead, but look, I am here before you now. I am alive. And by the way, I hold the keychain to death itself. Stop being afraid. And here's what's interesting is that Revelation is what we would call apocalyptic literature. Jesus spoke to John, and John wrote it down in this apocalyptic way. And a lot of times when we hear that word, we get a little bit uneasy. We're like, oh my gosh, end times, whoa! And it gets weird for some of us. But here's the reality. The Greek word of apocalyptic literally means to reveal or unveil. To reveal or unveil. So Jesus is speaking to John in a way of revealing something, unveiling something. Now, I think a lot of times we have the wrong misconception. We have the wrong idea that this book is more of apocryphic literature, which means to be hidden. This is not a coded message. This is not some secret thing that you need like a secret code to get to. Jesus is revealing, and he speaks to reveal things, not to hide them. He's speaking to bring hope, to bring comfort, to bring peace, not fear. And so for us, when we read this, we have to understand, at the root of it all, we have to understand that when John wrote these things, when Jesus spoke these things, there's real people, real lives, real issues happening that God was speaking to. And by the way, these things can and may be applicable for us today. But don't forget that these are letters to Jesus' church. These are letters to Jesus' church. That's what we're going to be looking at for these next few weeks, these letters to the church. Did you know that this is red letter content? If you have one of the fancy Bibles like mine, the words of Jesus are in red. When I was younger, I had one of these, a Bible that had the red letter words, and I was like, oh, that's the important stuff. Right? Jesus said that. I should probably read that stuff. Red letter content. Did you know that there's only a few instances in the New Testament that you actually get red letter content? The Gospels, Acts, and Revelation. That's when Jesus speaks. Gospels, the four Gospels, Acts, and Revelation. That's the red letter content. In each letter, references back to the vision that John had of Jesus in the beginning in chapter 1. Each of these letters, as we dive into them, reference back to what we just talked about. And it's important for understanding that these letters, they are not ultimately about the churches themselves even. They're about Jesus. Remember, if we hold on to everything else in this book, but we miss Jesus, we miss the book of Revelation. And as we dive into it, you're going to understand that there's a pattern, that the books start out with the letters start out with, to the angels of the church in. This is most likely addressing the leadership, the pastors, the leaders of the church. But then each letter ends with, whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. A general, bigger calling. It's plural. He says to the churches, not just your church. Churches. That maybe suggests that all 7 churches would actually receive all 7 of the letters. And that maybe that the content within each individual letter could be applicable between churches. That these letters were circular in design to commend, confront, but encourage. As we close today, I just have a few things that I want to challenge you with. As the band comes up and as we begin to just close out today, I want to leave you with a few things to think about, a few things maybe even to do this week. And it's pretty simple, really. Number one is to remember that this book, these letters, they are a promise of blessing, not a promise of confusion. There's blessing to be had when we read, understand, and apply what Jesus speaks to us about. So as we journey together, remember that Jesus speaks these things to reveal to his people all about his victory. I want to challenge you to take moments this week. Take moments to read, to process, and to seek what he is revealing to the people in the text. Before you ask, what is this about me? Ask, well, what's Jesus speaking to the person in the church of Smyrna? Why is that important? What is the goal of Jesus saying that to them? Then take a moment to ask, well, what about me? What is Jesus speaking to me through the letter to the church in Smyrna? What can I learn from this letter? What maybe hope, peace, and comfort can I find in him? Knowing that he is victorious and his kingdom will reign forever. Here's the reality. We as a church are going to take some steps this coming year. We're going to take steps and journeying even further outside of our four walls. I want our church to serve more. I believe God is calling us to serve our community more. And I believe we need to. I believe that there are hundreds of people right outside this hallway, these doors, right across that street. It's close enough that I could probably throw a baseball into a front yard. That need to hear about Jesus. That need to see Jesus in action. And sometimes, the only way that they're going to see or hear about him is when his people, God's people, journey outside the walls and physically make it happen. Be the hands and feet. So simply put is what, where, and how may God be asking each and every one of you and I to step out in bold, courageous faith in 2021. Trusting that he already has everything taken care of. What may God be doing in your heart right here, right now, in this moment, that you need to trust that he's already got it all worked out? It may seem impossible. It may seem unlikely. It may seem like there's no way that we could do what God is calling us to do. But my God thrives in the impossible. I don't know if you know that. It was impossible for a dude to come back from life, y'all. But he did it. My God thrives in the impossible. My God thrives in the uncomfortable. My God thrives in the unlikely. And I believe that as his church, God is calling us to walk into the impossible, to walk into the unlikely, to walk into the unimaginable, and trust that he's already got it taken care of. Oh, the finances aren't there? I'm going to trust that he's going to take care of it. Because he's the God over all money in the world, by the way. Oh, the people aren't there, the volunteers aren't there. I'm going to trust he's going to take care of it. Because my God is the most attractive God in the world, and people will come flocking to him. You don't have to advertise a fire. I believe God's calling us to go deeper and further than we've ever gone before. Us. Not me, not Josh and the band, not just the lead team. Us. The person sitting in front of you, behind you, to your right, to your left. The person sitting across a keyboard and a screen that you have no idea who it is. All of us. God's calling us to go further. And I'm asking you to join me in falling face first before God and saying, God, whatever you call me to do, I'm here. Hands wide open. Whatever you call, it's yours. I'm in. Brian Bloom, who has spoke here once, not that long ago, a few weeks ago, I love his saying. It's the yes before how. Woo! Man, yes before how. Imagine if we said yes before we even knew how. Because then when it happens, there's only one reality. How in the world did that happen? God. It ain't me. How in the world did that happen? God. And I want to be a church that says yes before we say how. All of us, together. Falling face first on our knees in prayer, saying, God, lead us deeper. Let's go. Because you are the God of all. The things of this world, it may be chaotic. Let's just be honest. It may seem hopeless and even broken at times. But God has revealed this to us. He's revealed that he is in control. He has never not been in control. He wins. And when we understand that and believe that at the core, we win too. And we can have comfort each and every day.